Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Clear as Mud, where we talk to game developers from all walks of life about their personal and professional journeys. I'm your host, Graham Waldrop. As always, our show is presented by Mudstack, the only asset management and collaboration platform custom built for game studios and digital artists. For more information, head over to mudstack.com. Today, we're talking with filmmaker and game developer HaZ Dulull. HaZ started his career in video game cinematics and then worked in visual effects on some movies you might have heard of, including 10,000 BC, Hellboy 2, and The Dark Knight. Remember when Batman and Lucius Fox took over all of Gotham's communication devices to track down the Joker? HaZ played a key role in that entire sequence and talks about how that part of the movie was created. We then get into HaZ's career as a director, where a short film, Project Kronos, launched his directing career that led him to directing episodes of a Disney Plus show, creating his own independent films, including one starring Katie Sackhoff, and creating his own company, HaZimation, where he's now creating films and video games using the Unreal Engine. We get into all that and a heck of a lot more in this super packed episode of Clear as Mud. Enjoy. You've done a lot, man. I've been looking up a lot of your stuff, watching a lot of your stuff, and just going through your IMDb and just seeing all the things you've worked on, particularly from a VFX standpoint. I mean, a lot of big movies in there. Yeah. Hellboy 2, Dark Knight, the Prince of Persia movie.
Oh yeah.
So take me through a little bit about your career in VFX and how that got started.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, I actually started my career in video games first before I got into VFX, because back then VFX was really, really hard to get into. I mean, it was very niche back then. So like I needed a path, and I went through video games because I was at university and I did a course called media communication, which involved computer science, journalism. It was one of those mixed bag courses, and I loved video games at the time. So I went to spend some time in video games. This was like PS1 leading to PS2 times. And then from there, I was doing a lot of in-game cinematics. I was kind of like making movies in-game. And then from there, I decided, oh my God, I'm going to stop, pretending to make movies in a video game and actually go work in the film industry. But, the funny thing is, pretending to make movies in a video game, later on in the podcast, we'll talk about the full circle that's happened, right? So, went to work in visual effects, and I started as a rotoscope artist. So, for those listening, that just involves me cutting up pieces of the film to like the CG guys can put stuff behind, right? And I did that. I worked on a movie called 10,000 BC, Sweeney Todd, a bunch of other movies. It was a place called MPC in London. And then from there, I then rose up to become a compositor. I was freelance. I worked at several places like Passion Pictures, Partisan, just loads of visual effects houses. And worked on TV shows as well as commercials as well. And then you get to a point in your VFX career, you get to become a visual effects supervisor, where you're less in the studio doing compositing, which is what I was doing, by the way, from roto to compositing, right? And then became VFX supervisor, and I spent a lot of time on set, problem solving. That's usually the job of the VFX supervisor, is to problem solve, figure stuff out on the day, and making sure we get enough good data and material to come back to the visual effects studio. And once we get the plates to do actual composites, like tracking data, chrome ball, reflection, all of that stuff, and lots of on-set photography. And then you get to a point where you want to go a little bit higher than that. And, you can see I was climbing the VFX ladder there, right? And I then became a visual effects producer. And this was at a company called Prime Focus, which used to be in London. So I was in the London office. And I was looking after the broadcast division, which is all the TV shows, as well as some of the feature films. And then at that point, I'm like, you know what? Unless you run a visual effects company, that's probably as far as I'll go. So I wanted to become a filmmaker, and I realized, the years and years and years working in visual effects, from a roto artist to compositor to visual effects super and producer, I realized, oh my God, I've essentially been to film school, because I've been on set, in the sort of movies I wanted to make, are the visual effects driven movies. And then from there, I decided to make short films. Yeah, so that's essentially my visual effects career right there.
Yeah, that's a ton. And it just seemed like it was just you're constantly working on stuff. Are you working on multiple projects at once, I would assume?
No. Well, it depends on the company. Some of the bigger studios, you would be working on a show, but then you'll be asked, hey, can you help out on this show and jump out and help on this comp or help on this tracking? And then you end up getting credits on both, which is usually a good thing. When you're a visual effects supervisor, you tend to be like when I was at Prime Focus, I was like, running the division essentially. So I was responsible for bidding as well as pitching, as well as running the current shows and usually there'll be one or two shows, but specifically I'll try to focus on one. They're usually the bigger ones. But when you're a compositor, you just hide on that one show and then you leave and you go to another company. Usually in Soho, it's like going next door to the other company. So no one really has a leave and do or anything like that because you're literally going to see them the next day, right? But yeah, I mean, I think it's because it's quite a prolific industry as well, and it still is. Back then it was really. I mean, when I got into previs, like you mentioned, Dark Knight is one of the films that I worked on, and that was previs. Where actually, I'm gonna scrub that. It was post-viz, and that was using my compositing skills to comp previs onto the plates, the footage, to figure out the look. And that's where I learned a lot about how to work at a very fast pace to bash things out quick, to really understand things like pacing, especially previs deals with pacing, understanding editorial, understanding lenses, cinematography, literally, the filmmaking kit bag, but on a computer. And I learned so much working on that show that I still carry a lot of those skills today when I'm making movies.
Yeah, previs stuff is always fascinating to me. My wife worked in previs for a little bit. She worked on the Falcon and Winter Soldier show.
Nice. Oh, awesome.
Yeah, and one thing she was saying about that was really interesting to me was that, the creators, showrunners, even the director weren't as involved in the previs stuff. It was like, here's like the script. Yeah. Now you guys kind of go figure out the shot sort of thing. Has it always been like that, or has that become more of a recent trend?
It depends on the director, I guess. But even when I worked on Dark Knight, we didn't really deal with like Christopher Nolan directly. We dealt with his visual effects supervisor, who had a good understanding, a good grasp of what he wanted, as well as like what the show needed. But a lot of it was like the script would be like truck flips over, and then you have to come up with different versions of what that truck flipping over sequence would look like, and then figure out, using tech viz, how you would shoot that. And then you work with the people like cinematographers or the heads of departments on the show to figure out how we would shoot this, and then you bring that with you on set if you need to. But then I think today's directors are a little bit more savvy. You look at people like Jon Favreau, who's like sticking on a VR headset and doing location scouts, right? And a lot of directors now are really embracing things like virtual production to really be more hands-on in previs, as opposed to what it was like, say, 5 or 6 years ago, where the directors would just hand it over and just like give a couple of notes and that's it.
It's a crazy process in terms of the amount of hands that actually touch the shots that we see. So you worked on that scene where the truck flips over in Dark Knight?
No, my sequence actually, I mean, the previous team worked on that. My sequence was if you remember the film, like when Morgan Freeman opens like the Batcave and there's all these hundreds of like monitors that monitoring the sonar. That's my sequence. Yeah. So I had to design the look of that and how we would show the sonar sequence, and how, when the bad guys are like infiltrating the buildings. I think the SWAT team are crashing through the windows. I had to figure all that out using compositing techniques and using the previs that the previous team did to kind of find the look of what that would look like, but do it very quick, because they would be doing these dailies in 4K or, at the IMAX. So I was using like, Apple, before it was Apple, it was Shake, right? So I was using Shake for compositing, and had to build macro scripts to allow us to work with sort of like IMAX plates and then reshrink them. And I was working at a company called Envisage, by the way, which is now called Envis. Like people like Nick Hatch and Martin Chamney, who run the company, gave me my big break in a way.
That's a great sequence too, because it's also like one of those things where it's like a huge moment in the movie, right? Where
yes.
If I remember, I mean, I've watched it a bunch, but I haven't watched it in a while. But I remember like that's the part where like they turn all of Gotham's communication devices.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. They use it so they can find out where Joker is and everything.
Exactly.
And it that could be really disorienting, right? If you do that wrong and be like, what the hell is going on? But I mean, it's very clear what we're seeing and the information we're being presented with is really easy to digest. So hats off.
For sure.
That's such underrated part, I think, of that movie is like,
is
the entire special effects though. In general, there's a practical nature to it, which is great. Nolan's always huge on that. But the parts where it's like, there is, you can tell, like it's a special effect, but it works, right? It's not one of those things where it's distracting and it's like, oh God, what is this? It's like, no, this is information that's really important. You guys did a great job of just presenting that and making it clear as to what we're seeing and the stakes involved.
No, for sure. Thanks, man. But also, like, one thing worth noting is that, like I was doing all the designs and figuring it out and going back and forth. Then once, the director was happy and the production was happy, we would hand all of that post-viz material will be handed to the lead visual effects company, which is Double Negative. And then DNEG would take what I've done and what the previous team have done and pretty much mimic that and make that work. So it's almost like we were doing like some hardcore pre-production in post, which is why I think they call it post-viz. But it was definitely, now this is kind of standard. Post-viz is standard, but back then it wasn't. It was like kind of new territory for us. So like, we know what pre-viz is, but how's this post-viz going to work? And now, I use it in all my projects all the time. And even when I was visual effects supervisor back in the day, post-viz was a big thing we'd always put in the budget to ensure that we have time to do this stuff and figure stuff out, and not just figure stuff out in pre, but also give it a bit of time, like, when you get the footage back, that, things are going to change. When you shoot stuff, things are always going to change on the day of the shoot, right? You can only plan for the best, but then, stuff happens, right? So having that post-viz, and certain sequences are full CG sequences in a way, so they're essentially, you're kind of doing post-viz right at the start because it's an entire 100% digital shot.
So when you were a VFX supervisor, what was kind of like the biggest pain in the ass when you went to set and there was going to be like a big VFX shot, and then it's like, oh God, you guys aren't doing this right at all. Like, I got to come in here and really put out this fire.
You know what? A lot of the times it's like, I'm not going to name names or anything, but like, some shows do it really well what I find is the shows that do it really well is when the first AD has an appreciation and understanding of how important visual effects is for the show, right?
Right, giving it enough time in the schedule for all that, right?
100%. Yeah, like they know I'm going to need time to like run on the set with my chrome ball and get the reflection map and my gray ball for diffuse, references, and then having a distometer to measure the set and tracking information, doing lens grid shoots as well, so you'll be able to talk to the camera team to give you time to shoot the lenses on the grid, so we have reference with distortion later in compositing and CG tracking. But I've been on sets where they're like, we've got this, HaZ, we've got this, you don't have to worry about it. I'm like, okay, cool, man, but I'm just gonna have a look anyway. And they'll put some like shoddy green screen that's flapping in the wind, and like it's lit like unevenly. I'm like, oh my God, that's gonna be more work to fix, guys. Like, I appreciate you trying to like, make it work, but that's actually going to cause more work and way more money. And sometimes I remember like one of the things I got to a point where I'm like, oh my God, I really have to like put my foot down. And the only way to do it is, fine, you can do it that way, but it's going to cost you X amount of money in post. And whenever people hear it's going to cost more money in post, especially the producers who are sitting around, they're like, whoa, do you say it's going to cost more? Okay, how do we fix this now? So that's usually the tip I tend to give any aspiring visual effects supervisors, like just reference that. It's going to be expensive to do it later if you don't do it now. And that may just be a simple thing as just taking 10 seconds to move that light rig to the side like a few centimeters, so it's not in shot or something like that, or it's not causing a shadow on a green screen. Because a lot of times everyone's really, being on a film set, it's very high pressure. Everyone's trying to make their day. Everyone's under a lot of pressure. Directors under a lot of pressure. Everyone's under pressure. So as a visual effects supervisor, you're trying to do your job in a very non-disruptive way. So yeah, you really have to learn how to read the room or read the set and also read the people. And I would say your first AD is probably the best person to huddle up with whenever you're on set, because he or she is going to be the person that's going to give you that time as a visual effects supervisor to do your job.
Yeah, the first AD I think is one of the most unheralded
100%
positions in filmmaking.
Oh yeah,
I've done it a number of times, and it's always like, man, this is talking about being under stress. I think the first AD is under the most stress out of anybody, because they got to be in charge of everything, safety, schedule.
Yeah.
I was working on a project last year where the director and DP were at odds with each other at just like all times. I had like talked to them separately.
Wow.
It got to the point where it was just like, man, you guys really aren't seeing eye to eye. It was just like, I got to try and keep this ship floating. So it's like, yeah. And, we did some CG on that too. And it's just like, it's a whole other ball game. Yeah. You got to give it so much more time than you think you would have to give it to make sure that it's going to come across. Cause that's one of my least favorite things in any movie, when it's like, oh, that's a visual effect.
Yeah.
That took me out of the movie.
Right. So, exactly.
Yeah. What games were you doing cinematics on?
Yeah, I started off at a company called Daber Studios in Camden in London. I started in North London, and worked on a game called Motocross Mania, which is like motorcycle racing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we did stunts in the air. It was pretty cool. And then I ended up working a bunch of games that got cancelled. One from on Dreamcast. And then I ended up working for a company called Codemasters, which ended up working on a game called Colin McRae Rally and Operation Flashpoint. And I think I know everything about sports cars, but I don't drive. So it's kind of an interesting combo. But, again, all of that was doing in cinematics. Usually it's a pre-rendered marketing cinematics, but then I got into the whole in-game stuff as well as, things like PS3 were coming up, or we had dev kits for that. And then my last job in video games as a cinematic artist was working on a company called Kuju Entertainment, which became Headstrong Games, on a Nintendo GameCube game actually called Battalion Wars. And we did all the cinematics for that. Actually, tell a lie, because when I went into visual effects to work as a compositor, I went to work at a company as a freelancer, a company called Spov in East London, and they were doing all the user interface graphics, like the UI graphics, and they were doing a lot of like the motion graphics intro sequences for Call of Duty, and they were also doing one on a game called Quake Wars. And since I was a compositor and it came from 3D, I was jumped into to kind of co-direct that with a guy called Miles Christensen over there, and we did the cinematics for Quake Wars, which was on the PC.
Cool. So what was like the, not even like the biggest thing you learned, most important thing you learned, but like as you continued to work through that, because I imagine, because you said you like started off in like sort of the early days, PlayStation days, things like that, and it's like making cinematics back then, I would think would just be so hard, particularly for
compared to now.
But it's like were you making any cinematics in Engine, or were they CG?
A lot of the stuff was pre-rendered CG, so we're using things like, it's going to really show my age now, but things like Alias Wavefront, 3D Studio R4, Character Studio, which was when it was with a company called Kinetics before it became Discrete. And then before, Autodesk, obviously. And then we were using the early version of Softimage as well, when it was with Microsoft at one point. Everything was pre-rendered, but there was some things we also kept in-game, which never looked really good. But the racing games, you kind of had to, especially when you're doing things like, like the opening sequence of a track. You want the camera to zip around the track, showing all the curves and all the cars and bikes. So those are cameras animated to make it feel like, a helicopter shot. But of course, for the PR marketing stuff, man, we worked some big, massive machines that would take like weeks to render sequences. And that was like 720 by 576, like PAL or NTSC resolution, right? That wasn't even 720p, dude. It was like PAL, right? We'd use things like BINC for BINC compression, for the video compression. But back then we're like, oh my God, this is freaking amazing. But I tell you what, though, there's something I do carry with me, though, from back in the day to still today. And that is, back in the day, we had like texture sizes like 32 by 32 or 64 by 64 pixels, right? And you got to tile them to make the entire skin of the car or the wheel, or sometimes the wheel is on the same UV map as the frigging car. So you have to like work at very, very tight resources, because obviously the memory in those consoles back then are not as high as the graphics memory that you have today. So it was very, very tough to work. But back then, we just thought, oh, that's just the way you do it, right? So flash forward now, we have like 4K textures or sometimes 6K textures. We have like amazing stuff that's coming out of Unreal Engine, and just stuff that you just dream that you would have like 10, 15 years ago. But the thing that I carry with me is the fact that to make something look big on such a small amount of resources, that's kind of what I did when I made my first movie, The Beyond, which was a low-budget indie sci-fi movie. It had to look big, yet I had very little money and very little time. So I think that mentality of like making the best of what you have within the small resources, but still be creative. I find that I'm actually way more creative when I'm kind of like stuck in a box. I'm like, oh, okay, I don't have the unlimited resources. What can I do to make this work? And sometimes some of your best ideas come out of that, as opposed to you have unlimited budget and unlimited resources. Sometimes you spot too much that you don't have a lot of room to be making those smart creative choices, because you don't need to.
Yeah, I want to get into Project Kronos, because that was really fascinating. That was your short film. Tell the audience a little synopsis there for that project.
Well, I mean, first off, like it was the short film that kind of got my foot into Hollywood as a filmmaker, and it's essentially a fake documentary about a group of scientists at NASA that's decided to put a human brain in a capsule, send it out into space, And then something like 50 years later or so many amount of years later, we get a signal back from like a civilization, and it's a signal via the consciousness in the brain. So it's a very, very complex Kubrick style kind of like science fiction film that deals with consciousness as a means of communicating with extraterrestrials. I mean, it was proper meta stuff, man. So, and I thought, why not make that as your first short? So, and the reason I went with a documentary was because at the time I was a visual effects supervisor on a huge Discovery show called America, the Story of Us, at a studio called Jellyfish Pictures. So I was surrounded by documentary filmmakers, editors, and I was in that groove of documentary. And there's something about documentaries that I love, is that the fact that it's just the way they're shot and the way they're edited. It's pure storytelling magic, you know, some of the best documentaries. So I kind of took that, merged that with my love for science fiction, you know, movies like Contact, Robert Zemeckis' Contact, movies like E.T., and just my fascination about, you know, just First Contact and the SETI project, right? So one of the things I did was I knew I didn't have a lot of money to make this, you know, on a compositor's salary. So what I did was I went onto the NASA website and just downloaded every single footage that was available on NASA, because it's public domain, right? And then I remember reading the small print, and the small print said you can use whatever you want, but you cannot use footage of people's faces or astronauts' faces. So I remember, like, you know, as a compositor, putting reflections on the astronaut visors to really conceal, you know, to hide the faces. And the other thing also is you cannot use footage with the NASA logo on. And guess what? All the cool shots had the NASA logo on. And again, being a compositor, I could just paint that stuff out. And so what I was doing was that, you know, there's shots in Project Kronos that's showing like archive footage of a really cool spaceship launching. Well, that spaceship is CG, but the smoke is from the Saturn V launch footage. So I'll take that, composite the smoke from the Saturn V launch onto the space shuttle launch footage, and then comp in my CG spaceship. So that's the beauty about being a compositor, is that you can find those solutions to help you make something out of just archival footage. So flash forward, like, you know, the short film got released. It was on Vimeo, and it got a Vimeo staff pick. And it went friggin' viral. And I was getting like Hollywood managers and the agents, like the CAAs, WMEs, all the acronyms, ringing me up, say, hey man, this is awesome. Do you rep? You know, do you have a script for the feature? And dude, I was like, what? I had no freaking idea I was hoping maybe I'll make my 5th film, send it to a festival or something and do the usual thing. But no, here it was. It was all about timing, because at the same time, you know, I think like the trailer for District 9 had come out, and, you know, there's a lot of sci-fi. The sci-fi bubble's growing really big. And, but also at the same time, there's this time where Hollywood were finding visual effects artists, people like Gareth Edwards, for example, and finding these really cool visual effects directors, and then seeing their shorts, and then just, you know, picking them up and say, hey, you know, we'll rep you, we'll develop your short into a feature. And I was one of those directors. So I got picked up by a manager called Scott Glasgow at the time. And it was great, because I got hired to write spec scripts for Fox, for Paramount. Now you can look at my IMDb, there's like some really cool projects. But then around 2015, I got to a point, I'm like, I'm writing all these cool projects. I'm in a writer's room and all that stuff, and I'm doing all these great meetings in LA. I'm meeting people like Blumhouse and Universal Studios. All that stuff is great, but I'm not actually making a movie. I mean what you call development hell, in a way. So I was supervising a show called Poldark at the time at a company called LexHag, and my boss there, Alexis Hager and Dan Marbrook, who were very, very supportive and still are very supportive. And they were like, look, man, like, you're never going to make a movie. I'm like, I don't know. He goes, look, you should go off and make your movie. You know, if you ever want to come back to visual effects, the doors are always open for you. So they always gave me gigs to help me go by as a filmmaker while I'm trying to get my scripts sorted and stuff. And at one point, I got to a point, I'm like, you know what? Screw this, man. I'm going to just make the movie myself, because this is going to take forever, right? So I went back to the studio, Bender Spink, who actually optioned the script, and they'll get ready to pay like another $10K or something to renew the option. I'm like, guys, I don't think this is ever going to go anywhere. This is going to be a huge project. It's like $35 million to make. I'm going to go off and make the movie myself, the movie that the short film was well known for, not the movie that you guys paid me to develop and stuff. And they're like, yeah, go for it, man. Go for it. You know, absolutely, you have a blessing. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And I went off and made that movie myself, dude. Obviously, I had some money saved up for a house. I was like, make a movie, buy a house, make a movie. And my partner, May, she was like, look, man, obviously it's incredibly risky, but if you don't do it, you're always going to be like, what if I did? And if you fail and mess up, you fail and mess up. At least it's on your own terms. I'm like, yeah, that's a good point. And she's like, but just don't mess up. I'm like, okay. So I'm
Make it worth it.
Damn, that's pressure. Yeah, that was pressure. But, best decision ever, because here's the thing. When you use your own money, you do not waste it. Like, I do not shoot stuff that's going to be on the cutting floor because it's my money. And so one of the things I did was being a visual effects supervisor and a visual effects producer, you make a lot of connections in the studio industry, right? And, you meet directors, you meet showrunners and executives. So I just rang them all up and said, hey, man, do you remember I worked in your show? They're like, yeah, hey, how you doing? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be making my first feature. They're like, congrats. Who's financing? I'm like, I am. They're like, oh. And they're like, okay, well, we'll give you some hard truths then. And they gave me some really, really good advice, like really brutal advice, which I needed. And I really appreciate them for doing that. And one of the biggest advice was don't try to make Star Wars on a low budget. There's a reason why, I'm talking about the new Star Wars, right? There's a reason why those Star Wars movies, or even the Marvel films, look that big and good, because there's a lot of money spent on it, it's a lot of resources, and that is what it is. If you try to make a low budget version of that, it's going to look like a B movie, right? And you don't want your movie to be a B movie, right? I'm like, no. So just look at the grittiness of what Neil Blomkamp does in his films. Look at what Gareth Edwards doing on his film Monster, and just focus on story and not so much spectacle. And I did that. And luckily, I took that advice very seriously. I made it into a fake documentary again, focused on characters. And the film came out in 2018. And it was number 2 in the iTunes chart next to Blade Runner 2049 and then next to Wonder Woman. And that was in 2018, January. And then you get sales reports, right? So as a distributor, our distributor, Gravitas Ventures, by the way, is an amazing distributor, came on board and they loved the movie. They distributed it for us. And that's the other thing also, when I spoke to a lot of filmmakers, they give you advice and like, well, you're not going to make a lot of money in your first movie because the distributor will take all the costs for PR, all the marketing costs, they recoup it. And you speak to a lot of filmmakers, they're like, yeah, I haven't made a single dime or penny on my movie because the distributor's still recouping the costs. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to find out what those costs are, and I'm going to make sure that they're not recouping that cost. And usually it's like, if they go to a festival, they're going to bill you for that, but they charge like 4 times more. Any distributors listen to this podcast, I love you all, just saying that's how it is. Okay? Because I still work with distributors. But things like the trailer, things like the poster, things like the marketing, we handle that a lot myself. So me and my business partner, Paula Crickard, we handle a lot of that ourselves, especially because I've done a lot of interviews at places like 3D World Magazine and Cinefex when it was around, that I had built up sort of like a kudos in the industry. So I use the visual effects industry as my marketing platform to tell people, hey, I'm a former visual effects guy. I made a movie. And all those magazines love covering those stories, right? So that's how we did it. And we cut our own trailer, we cut our own poster. So the distributor really takes a commission for getting the movie on the platform, which is what I need them to do. So around April, we got our first sales report. And it was like, we're in 300% in profit. And they had to triple check that, by the way. And they're like, you're like in profit. You've covered all your costs. I'm like, yay. They go, that's kind of unheard of in a lot of times, but it's great. And then in like September, bear in mind the movie came out in January, okay? September, Netflix comes in and says, hey, we want this movie. We'll give you a 12 months license deal. And with the money we made on that, the profit, what we did was, there was like 2 visual effects companies that helped us out. And one was called Squint Opera and the other one was called Fillmore in Amsterdam. And because I've worked with them, they really want to help out the visual effects guys. Say, hey, why don't you get your first movie? We'll help you. And they wrote off the cost. So they did a couple of CG renders for us, some tracking, just some really complex stuff that I didn't really have resources to do on my own. And they did all of that for me. And I said, look, this is the value of it. It's going to be like 20K's worth. I'll put it deferred. When the movie makes money, and it's all in a contract. I really wanted all that on paper. But they, in their minds, they wrote it off because, yeah, we've done this before, help filmmakers or whatever. It's fine as long as we covered our costs. So I remember ringing up the guy, say, hey, who do I send this check to? They're like, what? I'm like, yeah, there's a check for a deferred fee. The movie made profit, so I'm giving you the deferred fee back. They're like, we kind of wrote that off. Like, no one does that, dude. I'm like, well, you kind of have to, because I was that visual effects guy back in the day working on music videos for free. So I know what it's like. And now I'm in a position. So it felt really good to do that, to be that guy. But also for the visual effects industry, they're like, oh shit. So not every film producer will shaft you. If they can, they will help you. Now, other film producers that do exactly what I did. And I wanted to be part of that band of producers where we honor our our word. And if and I can't go around telling people this story if you haven't paid their deferred fee. I mean, it's kind of wrong, right? So we did that, and I did another movie called 2036 Origin Unknown with Katie Sackhoff, who was like awesome to work with, and she's amazing Mandalorian at the moment. And again, that one's a bit more traditional. That was a movie that's supposed to be my first movie, by the way, but because being a first-time director is hard to get any traction, I went and made The Beyond first, and then 2036 Origin Unknown kicked in when they saw the trailer, and they're like, oh wow, you can actually make movies, great. But the biggest thing that came out of making both those movies was I got to direct a show for Disney called Fast Lane. And how I got that gig was a hilarious story, because basically, when they do these 30-second teaser spots, of like before your movie comes out, it's got a 30-second teaser bumper, they call it. There was one trailer showing Katie Sackhoff and this robot just having this emotional moment. Someone at Disney saw it. Actually, I know who it was. It was Rafael Garcia, the executive, who's still a good friend of mine today. And he was like, man, this guy can direct CG characters and humans in an emotional way. We should get this guy in. So I was in LA in January 2018 to promote The Beyond in a way. So I went down there, and they gave me the script to read on the plane, like NDA'd and all that. And it was essentially a remake of the classic movie Herbie Goes Bananas. So they were rebooting that. And they're not calling it Fast Lane because they wanted a sports car and so on, an AI car. And I remember like going in there with my pitch material, and I'm thinking, it's not like every day I get to pitch for Disney, right? So I'm going to go big. So I did like a 50-page pitch deck. I cut my own previs. I did all this stuff, which they never even asked for. They just want to know what I'd be interested in coming to meet them. But I did all this stuff, and they're like, we pay people to do pitch decks and exploration, and we haven't even got a script yet. So how the hell are you designing this car? I'm like, it just came to my head, man. And they're like, okay. And then I met the showrunner, Matt Dearborn. And here's the thing. I went in the room, and they're like, look, man, we know you're going to kill this show. It's going to look amazing. We know like your visual style. We just don't know if you could direct comedy, because this is a comedy show, and it's a kid's show, by the way. Considering your last two sci-fi films were pretty dark, cerebral, sci-fi kind of thing, right? And I just basically pitched them this comedy sequence of like this car chase and this crazy sequence that's happening in the car between the two kids in slow motion. Apparently, it was a hit with the execs. They all laughed, and I got the gig, but I didn't know I was getting the gig to direct the pilot. I just thought I was going to just direct an episode. I mean, I'd be super happy just to direct any episode at that point in my career, right? To go, oh no, you're directing the pilot. I'm like, what? And I just realized, oh my God, the pilot, you set the entire tone of the show. You work closely to the showrunner. So I went to Vancouver. We shot that. When did we shoot? Oh my God, I think it was like summer 2018, I think it was. We shot that. And I was only hired to do the first block, which is episode 1, episode 2, right? The first block. It's an 8-part miniseries. And what happened was, because this is my first show, I'm proper rookie. Bear in mind, I came from the independent world where you pick up the camera, you shoot stuff, you do whatever it takes. This is a studio show, so there are unions and all of that stuff, especially in Vancouver. And the director doesn't pick up the camera. You don't go put GoPros everywhere. So there was a bit of a lesson I had to learn very quickly on how to work on the studio system. But the thing I quickly learned was that there's a lot of compromise you have to do, because it's a huge machine. There's a lot of executives, and they all have a say. And your job as a director is to try to preserve the integrity of the show and your vision. But most importantly, television's a writer's medium, whereas feature film's a director's medium. So essentially, I've got to honor the writer's vision and kind of be a guest director to play in that sandbox that I'm being offered to play in. Once you get that in your head, it becomes very easy to direct television, because now you're not like, you remove any egos that you had as a director working on a feature, because on a feature, it's all on your shoulders. You're the rock star director. You're in there. You can call the shots. Whereas in TV, you're dealing with executive. You're dealing with the showrunner, the writers. Things are being written on the fly. You have to adapt very quickly. And the shooting days are not the same you get on a feature. It's very aggressive. You are block shooting. So you're shooting episodes 1, 3, and 5 in that same place in the week, because that's when you had that location available or that house available. So there's a lot of stuff I learned. But there's one thing that was very interesting, was the fact that we're editing the first episode, the pilot, because Disney wanted to see the pilot, especially first-time director who's done TV. They really want to watch his pilot before they make any decisions. And I remember finding this out. I'm like, oh my God, but there's loads of green screen everywhere. There's like, we can't really show that. They go, oh, don't worry. they get it. And I remember being a VFX supervisor, seeing those famous words from a client. Oh, we get it. It's like, oh no, I've seen this before. So I go in, I learn After Effects. I speak to the editor and the editing assistant. Say, hey, let me just comp these shots. They're like, but there's no visual effects yet. I'm like, don't worry, I'll make something up. So I contact the visual effects company, send me a guy called Andrew Carr at Atmosphere Effects, send me the basic CG car. And I spent like all weekend like in my hotel, just comping all this stuff, sent it back to the editor, and then they showed it. And I'm like, okay, at least, I tried. And I get a call back like from the assistant saying, yeah, your flight's supposed to leave tomorrow, right? I'm like, yeah. He goes, yeah, you're not going on that flight. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, yeah, the guy Adam Bonet, who's the VP of Disney, wants to have a chat with you. I'm like, oh fuck, I'm really screwed up now. This is my first job. I knew I wasn't designed for TV. And they get on a call, and the guy Adam's like, look, man, I just want to say, like, how are you making your days? I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, well, you're on time, you're on budget. And I hear you quickly slap comp these shots. No one does that. So how are you making your days? And do you want to direct the last block? We're going to rewrite the entire block. Now that we know what can be done, you can make it even bigger you want. I'm like, oh my God. And that was because I made the effort of just going 110%. And not just be like, oh, well, it's a Disney show, man. And when I told him, like, what I was doing was really, in my head, I wasn't directing a Disney show. I was directing an independent movie. And once you have that, you end up achieving way more. And the guy was like, Adam was like, oh my God, that's such a good way of thinking, because everyone assumed when you're on a Disney show, that's it, man. You kind of lay back a bit. You have 100 people working for you. And I'm like, no, I'm still gonna, I was sticking GoPro shots underneath the car to get shots. And, that's usually like, no. And here's another thing. One big sequence. In fact, when you watch the trailer, it's on Disney Plus. You can watch the whole series, by the way. But if you watch the trailer, there's a sequence where there's the car chase and the camera goes underneath the truck. I remember pitching this and they're like, ooh, that's going to be a really expensive shot to do. You need to like have a special rig for the truck. You need to have a special system, like a track system on this. It's going to involve a lot of stunts. And I just put my little hand up in the tech recce meeting and like, couldn't we just like do what those guys did on that Jason Statham movie, Crank, where they just stuck a GoPro in a radio control car? The look I got was like, this guy should not be here. Who is this guy? But the cinematographer, Neil, this amazing New Zealand cinematographer, and his camera team, they were up for it. They're like, you know what, dude? We freaking love the idea of doing a guerrilla style shoot. So we shot it. We didn't tell anyone. We shot it. We put it in the edit, and it's in the friggin' trailer. So it just shows you sometimes you shouldn't overthink stuff. Sometimes the most simple ideas end up being your bigger money shot. There you go.
Yeah, like that. I did watch some of Fastlane, and it was really interesting comparing that to like some of your the older, like Project Chronos or 2036. It was like you were sort
totally
of
very different.
Well, very different, but also like your style was different, which makes sense. Like you're talking about, right? Like TV being a writer's medium, is sort of the showrunner's vision. You're there to just like, provide the whatever you can at that point, right? But it was really interesting watching those movies and then watching this, where it's like you are just camera's constantly moving. There's so much energy.
Yeah, that's my thing.
So much energy in every shot, and I thought it's not a show that like appeals to me, just the subject matter, but in terms of like what you needed to do on it, like you definitely achieved what that show needed, and the energy was really good in that. And yeah, I did see the shot under the shot you were talking about.
There you go.
Yeah, no, that was cool. Just to go back a little bit though to Project Chronos. I mean, one of the things that I loved about that was when I watched it was you're talking about being economical in your budget. And
yes,
you could definitely tell you did that in a really smart way, where it's literally just one set, right? I mean, you're in one set.
Yeah, it was literally one set.
Yeah,
that's right.
You're cutting between 2 or 3 shots of actors. Yeah, like 6 or 7 actors playing all these different scientists, and then interspersed with the footage you're talking about, all the NASA stuff. When you just hear that on paper, right? It could just be like it could be boring, right? It could be absolutely boring. But the way you did it, the way you wrote it, the acting was good. Like I bought that everybody was involved in this project.
Oh, thanks, man.
And I really appreciated the way it was edited though, because it was like you really did a good job of staying with the characters and then showing the space travel. and everything. I mean, it was you got wrapped up in it. You wanted to know what was going to happen next, like the way it ends.
And having a good soundtrack.
Soundtrack was really good too.
Yeah.
It had very like Hans Zimmer vibes to it.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, it was good. But you know, it was interesting because I was like, man, he's literally just got this one location, and he's cutting between all this stuff that got, you know, now I know where you pulled it from. But I was like, who knows where you pull all this stuff from? And you really pulled that off. I mean, it was really smart, economical filmmaking. And a lot of people who'd go out and try to make short films really try to overextend themselves or are a little too ambitious in scope. And you did not fall into those pratfalls at all.
Thanks, man. Yeah. Thank you.
And I still haven't watched Beyond because that's the feature version, right?
That's the feature version.
Okay.
Yeah,
I still need to watch that. Yeah. But I did watch 2036 with Katie Sackhoff. How did you wind up casting her?
Yeah, man, you know, that was a really interesting casting session. You know, at one point it was going to be like a male character. We were talking even to people like, you know, Kiefer Sutherland at one point. Oh my God, yeah. It was always going to be like that movie Moon, where it's kind of like a one-person show, but, you know, with a lot of tension and CG and so on. And then I remember one day telling the producers, and I'm like, look, man, like, I've got this thing about having female characters in my films. Like, I think maybe it's because I resonated watching movies like Alien and Terminator 2, who have two of my favorite action characters, you know, Linda Hamilton in Terminator and Sigourney Weaver in Alien. So why don't we try the female route? And they're like, yeah, let's do that. And so we sent to a bunch of people, and Katie's agent came back, goes, Katie read it. She has a few questions. And the big thing was, because at the time, you know, she had done, like, you know, she's done Battlestar Galactica. She's done, like, Pitch Perfect. But she hadn't done any sci-fi since then. She had done a lot of horror films. I think she was in one of the Halloween films, Halloween H2, I think it was. And she was in a bunch of, like, you know, other, like, sort of, like, domestic horror films, but she hadn't done sci-fi. So for ages, for her like to come back and do sci-fi, it had to be something that she got. And so I think her agent was like, look, she just wants to talk to the director, she doesn't want to talk to the producers, she wants to talk to the creator and see if there's any synergy. I mean, obviously that was like nerve-wracking for me because I'm like, oh, massive like Battlestar fan, right? Like, especially the character Starbuck. So I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to handle this Zoom? But within 10 minutes, you completely forget, like, you know, she's Starbuck and she's just like a really down-to-earth actress. And she remember her asking me, we had this long conversation, like, you know, why we should make this film, what this movie's about. You talk about, you know, all the nuances in the film, the social commentary and all of that stuff. But then she goes at the end of the day, like, look, why should I make this movie? It's like the ultimate question that's going to make or break, right? I'm like, oh my God. In my head, I'm like, I could feed her the typical commercial thing that my producers would probably want me to say, which is, this is going to be amazing for your career, man. This is going to be the best thing ever. You're going to win a award. I didn't want to do that. It just didn't feel authentic. So I'm like, you know, I'm just going to speak from the heart. I'm like, look, man, I'm going to be honest. Like, in Battlestar, you play Starbuck, which is a badass, right? In Chronicles of Riddick, you play a badass, right?
Yeah. Even in like Clone Wars, the Star Wars Clone Wars show, she, you know, Bo-Katan. Yeah. Badass.
Exactly. 100% exactly. So I'm like, in this movie, you're none of those things. In fact, you're the opposite. You're a weak, vulnerable human being that's battling with inner demons. And then through the show, you're going to rediscover your humanity. And it's really... Oh, and the other thing is, the entire show rests on your shoulder because it's literally you in a room and this robot, which is kind of homage to Flight the Navigator. I just literally said that. And she's like, I've never done any of those things before. I'm like, that's why you should do it, because you've never done it before. Get out your comfort zone. Very ballsy, I know. But within 24 hours, like, my producer called me up and goes, hey, I know what you said. You don't have to tell me, but she's in.
Cool. I'm
like, wow. And there you go. And then from there, we built up a good relationship. Yeah.
And that's the thing, too. Like, good actors want to be challenged. They don't want to be pigeonholed into one kind of role for the rest of their career.
Oh man, she created that character in Origin Unknown, by the way. Like, you know, we had a script written by a guy called Gary Hall, and I wrote the story. But when she came on, it was like, literally, just rewrite this because you're the one that's going to live in this character. And she brought so much to the table, like in pre-production. We would spend 6 months having Skype calls every week. Then became twice a week and really fleshed out what this character... I mean, she was all in for it. And then on the day, you know, we're going through sides, you know, the script sides and, you know, just figuring stuff out. And it was all about character. It was such a joy. I learned so much working with her, for sure.
Yeah, it was one of the things that was interesting to me about it was, like, you're exactly right. It's in a room for the most part. you're doing kind of the stuff you did with Kronos, where you're sort of going back and forth between space stuff and this sort of one spot for the most part, this one location. But the thing that I thought that was really interesting about it was her dynamic with the Artie character, the AI.
Yeah.
Is Artie CG or was he a practical effect?
It's a bit of both. On set, we had a practical one. So we had a practical, because originally we wanted to do it all mechanical, right? That was my dream. We went to work for a company called Asylum Effects in London that do a lot of like practical props for movies. It worked out that it was going to be a hindrance on set because of the space you would need and the setup times, and things could always break. And this movie was shot in 12 days, just so you know. So we didn't have a lot of time to shoot this, and it's a lot of material. So we decided we had something built for eyeline purposes. And there's a few moments where she does touch the robot and open the panel. That's real. But everything else, like all the wide shots, are all CG. We worked for a company called Territory Studios, which Territory Studios, by the way, are amazing. They do all of the UI work, all of the user interface sci-fi user interface for films, all the Marvel films, the Blade Runner 2049. They started off doing stuff in Prometheus. My good friend David Sheldon runs that company, and he helped me out on my first movie, The Beyond, for next to nothing. Did all the title sequences for me. So it was only fair to say, hey, now that I've got an actual budget here, I'd like to hire you on your rate to work on my second movie. So it's always that pay it forward, and I really want to encourage that. Just keep paying it forward when people help you, because it's just the way to do it, man. And they came on, they did all the CG for it. They did all the visuals that RT's front, the front lights. They did all of that. I really didn't want Katie to be looking at a tennis ball or something. I really wanted her to see something and feel something, and really treat it like it's a character.
Yeah, no, it felt certainly like it was a real character. I mean, I was trying to tell the whole time, I was like, I don't know if that's CG or practical, which was really good, because with like the space stuff, I could sort of tell, like, okay, yeah, this is some CG stuff going on here. But the most important part of that movie is the dynamic of Katie's character and Artie. I mean, it's just like
it's their relationship.
Yeah, it's good stuff. And I wonder too, like you were talking about how you kind of let her, really get invested with the character and sort of like rewrite stuff and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, so is that something you want to continue to do in terms of letting your actors really be a true collaborator in your stories?
Yeah, it's kind of like this style that I have. I love improv. I love stand-up comedy. I have a huge amount of respect for stand-up comedy. And I always find it so interesting that sometimes some of your best material comes out of improv. So we always have a script, obviously for insurance purposes, and producers want to have a script so there's something to finance. But a lot of the times, like even with Project Kronos, it was like, when I did the short, it was a conversation I would have with the actors, and then they'll go off and say stuff in Project Kronos, it's like them interpreting what the science was in their voice, in their own head, as opposed to like word for word verbatim. So with Katie, it was like we had the script, and then we'll talk about the situation. I'm like, now that you have all that information, just go with it. Just do a version. Sometimes, obviously, we shoot the scripted version just for backup, just in case. But most of the time, it's like, I would say 60%, 75% of the time, it's the improv stuff that comes out that is way more natural. And I find that as my directing style, I quite like that, because it becomes more fun, and I can shout out directions, say, hey, try this one, but do it like this, or hey, just do one more take, but this time push that enunciation much higher here, or maybe just this one, just go to town, just go really, really mad. And I find it so much more fun, because you just let the camera roll and you're just doing all this stuff. Poor script supervisor has to somehow figure out which take is the best one.
Yeah.
So that's why I always huddle up the script supervisor. And we had this great script supervisor on the show called Hannah, and bless her, man, she just literally had to sit next to me. She goes, no, I'm going to sit next to you, then I can know exactly what you like and what you don't like.
Yeah, that's always fun, pissing off the script supervisor.
They're another rock stars. First ADs, script supervisors, my God.
Unsung heroes.
Rock stars. Totally.
Well, when you're doing, like, it didn't really feel improvised, which I think is a good sign of good improvisation, because, like, there are some movies where it's like you can tell the actors, particularly in comedy these days, where it's like you can tell the actors are just riffing, and it doesn't stop, and it's not going anywhere. But it felt like, it didn't feel like that to me in this. It felt like this was natural, this was organic, this was telling me something about the character or advancing the story, or both, which is always, the best of both worlds. So whatever you guys did there, it definitely worked in terms of like, it felt like these lines were totally written and they were, being delivered by a really good actress.
I think it's a mix of everything though. I think like you need to have something on paper first to start that conversation. And then, once, like Katie really got immersed in the character so much that at some point I didn't know when she was out of character, even when we start shooting. And that's just a testament to her being just like this method actress, right? But I think for me, like, as a filmmaker, like I'm always trying to find a moment which feels grounded in a film like that, because you could so easily fall into the world of spectacle and so on that you just didn't want to have that when you're in that room. So like, there was a lot of tight shots that I did a lot of previews myself as well. And that really helped inform Katie, as well as the other actresses as well, and actors, like what we were doing, what I was doing, how we're going to shoot it. And also, that was the first movie, by the way, the first feature that I worked on that actually had a visual effects supervisor work on. Because on the Beyond, I was the VFX soup. On the Kronos, I was the VFX soup, as well as the director and everything. But on this one, the producer was like, look, man, I know you could do all this stuff, but I need you focused. So bring on a VFX soup. And I remember thinking, well, if I'm going to get a VFX soup, it's got to be someone that I don't undermine, or I don't go into, hey man, that's not how you do it. So I'm like, you know what, the best one to do is get someone that's better than you. And I got like this amazing VFX supervisor called Paddy Easton, and he had supervised 28 Days Later. He's done like Sunshine, he's done like Harry Potter films. And I remember like sending my CV to him, and he was just like, nope, no job for you. You're not good enough. I'm like, I'm going to hire this guy. And he comes up, he's now like a really good friend of mine as well. But like, I remember him being on set. I'm like, you know what? I don't have to think about it, because this guy is a legend. I know he's going to be right. And it's great. Sometimes it's better to just work with people that are better than you, as opposed to someone that's on the same level, because you're just going to get the best, right? There's no point hiring someone that can do the job just as good as me. I want someone that's better than me.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what was it like for the person who played Artie, the AI? Was he there on set, or would you record him separately?
Well, it was a both. We had a stand-in voice actor to do like the lines, and he was outside of the room, because it's a very small contained room. So we had one person outside, and then there was like little mini microphones placed everywhere. We also by the way, also just a side note, the VFX supervisor Paddy put a bunch of tiny GoPro cameras in the corner of the set. They were so concealed you couldn't even see them, right? And he wanted to put them for witness cameras. So when we do the RT animation, we had a full 360 of what the whole set was, that we could do match movie and also good references, right? To see all the different angles. I saw that footage on his laptop. I'm like, these look like really good CCTV footage. Why don't we use that to mix it up in the edit? And he was like, no, dude, they're just witness cameras. I'm like, no, but they work. You put a filter on there. So that's where these little happy accidents happen, where you see stuff like, actually, and it helped break up. It also helped make it feel like this weird, ominous facility that's always watching. You find out it's actually Artie watching all the time, because Artie is a sentient AI. He's connected with every single camera system in the building, and that wasn't in the script. And we know that's how you can really extend that character, make him a little bit sinister just by showing CCTV footage. And that's because the visual effects supervisor put GoPro footage. So, but in terms of the voiceover actor, we had one person called Judd who was doing the stand-in, just doing sort of like reference. But he was so good. At one point we almost said, hey, you should use him, he's good. But we had already made a deal with another actor, Steven, I forgot his surname, but he was in the Outlander TV show. And he came in afterwards, and he then did a fresh pass, and we wrote additional lines. And we end up rewriting a lot of Artie's lines on the in post, because there's so much that was happening. We're like, oh my god, there's stuff that we now that we've seen the footage and seen the reaction, we should tweak that line. So I think it was one of the last things we did in the film was do Artie's lines. Yeah,
that's crazy about the camera though, because I thought that was a good way to sort of break up the movie a little bit.
100%.
Because
yes.
It could get to a point where it does get monotonous to be in that one place.
And it was getting that point in the first edit. I'm like, oh my god, this is a bit boring.
Yeah, but then like when there's one scene, I can't remember. It was one scene where she's taking a phone call, where Katie's house character's taking a phone call, and it's like Artie's watching her, and I was like, oh, okay,
yeah,
this is cool.
Yeah,
this is cool, because it's adding a little extra elements, and you would never know that wasn't originally planned. So
even the CCTV footage, the whole visual style of Artie, being slightly distorted visuals, That was something we did all in like DaVinci Resolve. We did all that in DaVinci Resolve. We did that all in like as like an online effects thing. And then Andrew Poppleston, who's the creative director over at Territory, he rendered this like a generic After Effects pass of all these effects for us. Then in Resolve, we're able to slip it back and forth and find the moments rather than do it as a fully comped shot. So there's a lot of ways, we still, even though this is a bigger budget movie, compared to my first movie, we still had to find guerrilla techniques to get the shots we want, because it's kind of weird. Even though you got a bigger budget, money still runs out somehow. It still runs, you're still under budget. So I didn't quite get that, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that was good stuff. Yeah, I'll definitely check out Beyond at some point as well, just so I can see what happens with that Project Chronos storyline. It's like once it ends, I was like, what happens?
Oh, we definitely continued it in the feature.
Well, which was smart to do for the short, because then that gets people wanting to know what happens in the feature. So,
but that's how I got picked up by the studios, because it was ended in that way. That's how Hollywood loved those kind of like open ended, like what happens next, man? Let's put this in development. Right. Like if I bookend it, it is what it is. So yeah.
Can we talk about Rift, the project you're working on now?
Well, we actually finished it.
You finished it. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a really interesting project to me, because you have made simultaneously, right, a film and a game.
Correct. Yes.
Now that's wild to me. And you did it both in Unreal. You made the film in Unreal. You made the game in Unreal.
Correct. Exactly. I mean, I have to say that was just one of those moments when the pandemic hit. We're like, how am I going to continue to stay relevant in an industry where you could quickly become irrelevant by not putting out enough content, right? And that's a scary thing for any filmmaker, whether you're a writer, director, music guy, whatever. Like, you always got to be relevant in this industry, because you can easily get forgotten, right? And I'm like, oh my God, it's taken us so long to get we're getting ready for the third movie called Luna, which we were going to shoot, we were casting, and all that got put on hold, sort of like the first of 2020. So we're like, oh my God. So I did a lot of previs in 2019 using Unreal Engine, because I've just read a lot about it, and I love the idea of using game technology to do that. And what was really interesting, when I was doing the first previs, it didn't look like previs, because it was fully shaded. There's reflections, shadows, there's ray tracing, and yet this is all real time. So I remember showing studio executives in LA, I'm like, yeah, this is previs. And some of them were like, wait, is this a first pass of an animated film you're pitching? I'm like, no, this is previs for a feature, a live action feature. They're like, huh? Because we've seen previs. It's usually like, the characters of their T poses sliding across the floor in grayscale. It's as rudimentary as it gets. I'm like, no, this is all previs. It's all like done in game engine. And they're like, wow, my God, this looks really polished. And then on the plane back, I'm like, what if we did make a movie like that? So I end up convincing this comic book company to hire us to do proof of concept for them, called Battlesuit, which is based on their comic book called T-Pub Comics. And we did that. That was the first Unreal Engine short, and that got a lot of traction, because we were making shorts in Unreal. It was on the Facebook page, virtual production page. Razer came and sponsored it, and Video did a big thing of it. It was an epic spotlight, and all of a sudden I'm getting a lot of this traction. But yeah, I'm looking around and no one's making a feature, or at least announced a feature film. I'm like, I can't be the only one thinking this, right? And I speak to a lot of filmmakers, like, yeah, man, but everyone's just not sure that a game engine can pull it off, because everyone knows when you make an animated film, it's like a Pixar or Leica Studios and so on. There's a whole pipeline in place for this. And when the pandemic hit, I'm like, I'm going to make a feature in Unreal, because literally it's not like I'm going to be able to shoot a live action any sooner. So we had a bunch of scripts that we were developing. You have one script that you write, it's unshootable. No one's giving you money to make that right now, but maybe on your fifth film, if you've made it, then you get that James Cameron level, you can make anything you want. That was that script. And it was basically a script about this kid who had the special abilities to distort time and space and go into various multiverses. And it's action-packed. There are physics-defying, gravity-bending action sequences. You read it on the page, you're like, yeah, no one's going to shoot this today. And my producing partner, Paula, was like, well, if you're going to make an animated film, why don't you make a movie that makes sense to use the medium of animation, as opposed to just doing a movie that you could shoot in live action. And I loved, the animated film Spider-Verse. And I'm like, oh God, this is amazing. When I saw Spider-Verse, I'm like, so what if we did something that was so batshit crazy to do that you can only use animation's a medium. So we went ahead and we did a test sequence around October 2020. We started putting this idea together. Andrea Tedeschi, my head of CG, was like, let's just do this. Let's give it a test. We did 10 minutes. But here's the thing. We didn't go around telling people that this is a proof of concept. We just went, hey, man, we're in production on our animated feature. And this is the dailies. And I mean, it was dailies, but we didn't call it proof of concept. And everyone's like, oh shit, you guys are doing it. You guys are making it. And we're getting all this traction from Epic. And then we end up getting like an Epic mega grant from Epic when they heard we were making this feature, and we're developing our own tools in Unreal to allow me to be more hands-on as a director, to use virtual cameras and so on. And then, we started getting sponsorship from Asus to give us hardware. Nvidia came on the A6000 cards for us. Reallusion came on with their iClone software. So, hey, we got this thing called Pitch and Produce. We give you some money and the tools. And all of a sudden, we're financing this movie, and we managed to get equity financing elsewhere because people start to see all this traction. And all of a sudden, just like The Beyond, just like Project Kronos, I'm doing that in this new technology called Unreal Engine. And it's only been like 2 weeks ago we wrapped. Like the last shot went in the movie, and they're currently doing an HDR grade. And it was announced last week, by the way, that Sparks Animation Festival in Vancouver is going to do the world premiere. And Sparks Animation Festival is an Oscar accredited festival. So that's a big deal for us in terms of like when you get your animated film shown. So I'm flying off to Vancouver like end of this month, dude, to like do a Q&A and everything. And it's so exciting.
Oh, nice. Well, congratulations on the festival pickup. That's great. And also just like having the gumption to try and do something that I don't know if anyone's making any, if there's anyone else out there making a feature length film in Unreal.
Oh, there are a few. I found, I was over at Annecy Animation Festival in south of France earlier this year, and I was at SIGGRAPH last month, and people like Bronze Studios are doing an animated feature all in Unreal. It's all very stylized. And that's the thing. Like when people ask me like, what's the hardest thing to do when you made your animated feature? And it wasn't really the animation. It wasn't the technicalities of making the movie, because there's so much tools available, and you still need good animation. You still need good voice actors. All of that stuff was standard. For me and for the team, it was more about finding a unique style that felt like it wasn't a video game cinematic, because already there's that stigma. Using a game engine, it's going to look like a video game, right? And we had a lot of that. We spoke to a lot of networks out there. We spoke to a lot of people, and they're like, yeah, but it's going to look like a game engine. So what we did was, when we showed the 10 minutes to people, we didn't even tell them it was a game engine. It was like, we're making an animated film. They're like, oh my God, this looks so good. And we realized, oh my God, that's how you do it. You don't tell people it's made in a game engine until later on. But and that's in terms of like getting distribution and finance and so on. But yeah, I think for us also is everyone on the team, including myself, have worked on animated films, and we know the hardship that's involved in animated films. Like, you got a very linear pipeline. You do your storyboard, your animatic, and then you go to layout, then you do your shading, your lighting. And if you want to make a change to the layout when you're in animation, it's going to be a bit expensive. And so what we're doing, we're kind of just like piggybacking at the back of Epic's mantra, which is democratizing animation, changing the way things are being done. And essentially that's what we did. Like, we worked in a very agile way, which is like, we have this rule in the studio, which is, progression over perfection. So we would do the previs. The previs essentially is shot one. That's the shot. And then we would replace the characters with higher res characters, but we're constantly iterating the shot. In fact, like a few months ago, we went back to the very first shot we did in October and reiterated that. So we're not waiting for things to happen. Like, for example, like, we built all our characters while we're working with the writer Stavros Pambalis on the script, because we knew, regardless of how the script's going to turn out, we still need those 3 characters, right? So why wait till the script is locked? Let's build those freaking characters. So once we built those characters, even the rough version, I was able to go and block the shots out while we're still writing the script. And that's kind of unprecedented in a way when you're making an animated feature. But as an indie studio, like a team of like 6 or 7, you kind of need to be very nimble and be very generalist approach to making
it kind of takes away the animatic aspect of it too, I would imagine.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and you can sort of just jump in there and really start seeing things come to life faster, which has to help you from a visual storytelling standpoint, and just in general, the animators. Yeah,
for sure. Even with motion capture, we use inertia suits like XNs. And the cool thing is, we didn't need to buy an XNs. We hired motion capture artists, people like Gabriella, people like Ace Raul, people like Alex Kong. And these are people that I met, by the way, like online on the virtual production groups. And that's the other thing about this whole Unreal Engine filmmaking, is that there's a huge community out there helping each other, sharing stuff, including Epic's online, portals. So these artists already had motion capture suits. So it was very easy to say, hey, I need this additional shot, or can we try this, or just do a bunch of takes, and then I can treat the motion capture data like I would do when I'm editing footage, is literally edit mocap data in a very easy way, all inside sequencer in Unreal.
Man, it's just a whole new world of filmmaking right there. Take me through lighting in Unreal and sort of the challenges and the fun with that, because I've worked in Unity and Unreal, and I've always found Unreal to be much more, technically proficient over Unity. But I imagine when you're actually like trying to make a movie, right, that just opens up a whole new world. So I'm really interested in just nerd out about lighting for me. I want to hear it.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, for sure. I mean, I always have like a reference mood book with me in a way, and I take the same approach to lighting in Unreal as I would do if I'm lighting a real world set, which is, having your key light. So we would light all our characters a standard 3-point light system. We have our key light, we have our fill light, we have our edge rim light. But then what we started to do was like, how do we paint with light, right? And one of the things we started doing was adding tiny little rectangle lights close to the eyes, and in Unreal you can tell the light to only affect certain geometry. In our case, only affect the eyeballs. And all of a sudden, this character that was missing this thing that we couldn't put our finger on, we're like, oh, it's got life now. When the eyeballs move, it's got that reflection. So we started to play a lot with reflections a lot. Again, like, as I was saying earlier, I would treat it like I would light a real world set. So, we would light the environments first, make sure we have the good environment lights up, and then we start doing specific lighting rigs that Andrea Tedeschi would build these lighting rigs for us that allows us to basically all our characters to be lit in the very same way, because we have different artists working on the show. We don't want them lighting it in their own way, right? We don't want people using 100 rec lights and a couple of spotlights. We want everyone to use the same lighting rig. So we spent some time building that. And then the other thing also, we realized that in order to get that look, the lighting plays a big part of the shaders. So we end up creating our own cell shaders. When I say cell shade, I'm not talking like a post-process effect here, like, that goes across the whole image. Hell no, that's not what we're talking about. I'm talking like actual shaders, the textures, the way the hair looks and everything had to be built. And we looked at things like anime. We looked at CG anime, like Pacific Rim, for example, and all of those shows. And we're like, okay, what works, what doesn't work, and what would make this feel right and find that happy medium. And it was a lot of time, it's like Andrea creating shaders, I would do some lighting, we'll bounce it back and forth until we found the right look, and then we just nailed it. And the thing is, it took months to nail, dude. In fact, I think it took like close to a year for us to get that look. But that didn't stop us from making the movie, because we just made the movie, because this is real time, right? We don't have to wait for like hours to render. So yes, you can make changes on every single shot because you're in real time. And when I say real time, I'm talking about what you see is what you get. I'm talking about final pixels here. I'm not talking about rendering passes, like your beauty pass, your reflection pass, and so on, and then you comp it to get the shot. No. I mean, this is kind of like going to the dark side here, but I'm saying we don't do no compositing on this show. We just want to render exactly what we're seeing in Unreal as 4K 10-bit EXRs straight into DaVinci Resolve. And that was the workflow. That's cool. Jeez. I'm just imagining that. And then I imagine also you got to do, I mean, that's really cool about like the lighting with the eyes and being able to, start off with your basic foundation, your 3-point lighting, and then like, all right, now we can do some things that we couldn't do, if you were making live action. I imagine the same thing, the same kind of thought process goes into how you're shooting, right? 100%. Yeah. 100%. Are there any cool camera tricks you did that there's no way in hell you can ever do that in live action? Oh yeah. I mean, the thing about, there's some camera sequences in there that, again, like, like on Fast Lane, we had like GoPros going underneath the truck. Obviously in CG land, you can go crazy, right? But the problem I found as a filmmaker is it becomes a bit too overwhelming when you're in Unreal, because you literally can move the camera wherever you want. You start doing these crazy camera moves and you start to realize, hang on a sec, is that going to break the story? Is it going to break the grounded nature? So I had to set myself some rules, and that is, when two people are talking, keep the camera quite intimate, especially the scenes are very intimate between the kid and the brother. And then when there's an action sequence, really just treat the camera like it's a dance, And so there'll be moments where explosions would trigger off, the camera would shake and cause the camera to fly across the room, and then it will kind of... So I kind of like treated the camera like it was a character, like it had a life of its own, and like it was like a fly on a wall trying to capture the moment, which you can't do too accurately on a real live action set, because the poor Steadicam guy is gonna die, or the Steadicam girl is gonna die.
Yeah, he's just gonna start shaking the camera during an explosion. That'd be kind of funny.
Exactly, but lens racking, lens whacking is a big thing. So the fact that I can go to like 8, go right down to like 4mm or 8mm and do some really crazy distorted lenses, and then keyframe that lens in the sequencer to really create an effect, kind of like a Jaws effect, where the camera is kind of like pulling back, but the focus is pulling forward, and all of that stuff. We're able to mimic that, and all of this stuff, dude, is all done in sequencer. Everything, and that's the thing. We spent a lot of time building. Well, Andrea built a lot of tools that literally exposes the control thing to do with like eyeline, right? Eyeline's a big bug of mine, where you do the mocap session, it all looks great, and then you bring it into the scene, you're like, oh no, the eyelines are different because the character's a bit bigger than the actress. And I don't want to go back to animation to adjust eyeline. So we built these tools in Sequencer that allows us to adjust the eyeline within seconds, and it's done. And also, we built tools that really allows us to do real-time, not just real-time production, but real-time dailies. So here's an example. Traditional dailies, you render your QuickTimes or your reel or your sequence with burnt-in time codes and so on. You present it, and then the visual effects coordinator or animation coordinator will write down all the notes from the director and the CG soup and so on. And then you kind of decimate that information via Shotgun or F-Track or whatever you're using, or Google Docs, to your artist, right? That could take a couple of days to a week before the changes start getting into action. What we did was, because we're a small team, we have a Zoom session. Everyone screen shares their Unreal Engine scene, and we'll just walk through the shot in Sequencer. And then once we're like, oh, let's do something about that shot, open the shot up in Sequencer and make the changes. So things like, oh, can we just move that tree to the left a bit more? Can we just slow down that action right there? Everyone was doing a lot of that, and I was doing a lot of the tweaks myself. So by the time we finish our session, I would say like 90% of the tweaks were done. And only the stuff that we couldn't do, like, completely remodeling something or really rework a shader, then we would do that, after the session. So that really removed a massive bottleneck of dailies, because now dailies become really productive. Like, you are doing the tweaks on the fly.
Yeah, and that is beyond productive, and that really cuts out the middleman, especially when you're working remote, right? I mean, I remember when we made our feature, we had the post process was just a total bear, because we had our editor was in LA, or sound was in Atlanta.
Right.
It was like music was 2 hours north of Atlanta, so it was all these, even though those were more, mostly sound components outside of picture editing, but it was like everybody had, it was like the ways you're disseminating all the data, the audio, the visuals, It was just such a pain. But to be able to do that in the engine and just be like, all right, let's just do it here. We can all be right here at the same time, even if we're not actually, in the same location. That's powerful stuff, and really like making a movie like that. I mean, you're not even just doing like post or anything. You are making the movie like that. You are doing production
exactly.
like that. So
yeah, it's going to be really hard for me to go back to live action.
I was about to say, do you want to go back to live action at this point after experiencing the Unreal filmmaking process?
It's going to be hard because I feel like I've had such a massive luxury in the world of real time, where you are not limited with how many cameras or lenses you have. You're not limited with like making your day in terms of weather conditions,
getting a lighting
like
package,
but
all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly, right, exactly. Mm-hmm. But I have to say, you still need good voice actors. You can do the most amazing animation. It could look so gorgeous, but if your voice actors suck, people are going to turn off within the first few seconds.
Oh, yeah. And it looks like you got some good ones.
Yeah, we got some we were quite lucky, actually.
I love Dave Fennoy.
Dave Fennoy's awesome.
He's great.
And I didn't realize how much of a rock star he is like in all the games that he's worked on. His work in Walking Dead season 1, the game, is just unreal. Exactly, pun intended.
Yeah.
But we were quite also lucky to work with Jane Perry, and Jane Perry was actually my first feature film. She was the lead in that. But what I realized about Jane over the years was that she was getting like BAFTA awards and BAFTA nominations. She actually won a BAFTA award for her role in a game called Returnal on PS5. but she's also in Cyberpunk, and she's also the lead main recurring character in the Hitman franchise. So she's a rock star as well. So we realized that, you know, traditional filmmaking, when you package a movie, right, you need to have stars attached to it. That is the crux of essentially getting your movie financed, right? But because of us, we didn't finance the movie based on stars. We financed it the fact that we're using Unreal, we're going ahead and make this. So when it came to promoting the movie, you know, and if you saw the latest trailer that came out, but even on the trailer, we got like Jane Perry, brackets, Cyberpunk 2077, Returnal, Hitman, and Dave Fennoy. We got Walking Dead. All of a sudden, they are the stars that's going to help get this movie off the ground, because the audience that we're tapping into isn't just your traditional film goers, it's your gamers, you know, and it's a huge industry. So for us, from, you know, wearing a producer's hat, you know, you got to strategize when you're making a movie. It's not just about, hey, I'm making a cool movie because I can make it on Unreal and it's going to be awesome. Yes, there's that, but also the most important thing is, how are you going to get your movie seen? How are you going to get it distributed? How are you going to convince distributors? And for us, having voice actors that were not only amazing talent to collaborate with, but they also carry some level of weight with them, the equivalent of live action in a way.
Yeah, no, for sure. Did you do the voice acting recording? Did you do that in person, or was that also remote?
All remote, man. It was all remote, and it was so funny seeing how everyone's studio set up. Like Dave's got his own like freaking recording studio, right? So he's bossing it with like the amazing mixers in the background and stuff. But Jane Perry's in her house, and she's got all these like amazing like black drapes around her, and like to protect the sound from coming out. It's awesome. And then we worked with this amazing talent called Cade Tropiano, and Cade, he's actually in an Apple series called Blackbird. So I think he's won a lot of the flashback sequences where the main character is the kid, and he is amazing. How we auditioned to him was, how loud can you scream? And he can scream. He could scream like ear piercing, like, you know, Drew Barrymore and E.T. scream, right? So we're like, damn, you got the job. And he was amazing. He's one of those kids that is kind of like, he's like mentally older than what he looks. Very, very smart. Like the conversation we're having about, goes, yeah, you know, I know what you're doing here. You're referencing Titanfall. I'm like, damn, you play that game? What? So, and you know, he's referencing certain movies and books. So it was so cool that every actor is very different. The way you work with, like with Jane, there's a lot of like improv as well. Because obviously working on my first film, she really gets it. But Dave was awesome, because with Dave, it's a very different way of working with Dave. With Dave, it's like, he wants to know the context of the show, and he'll give you like 10 different versions of it, and they're all freaking good. You're like, oh my God, like that makes my job hard. And then he'll give you alternates.
It's a great problem to have, though.
It's a good problem. Oh, 100%. But then he'll give you alternates of like grunts and hits. You're like, oh my God, that's like our Foley done right there, because we can use all these in the Foley action. And I have to get him in to record certain things. I mean, and you could tell when someone does this day in, day out, they just deliver. Right, it's done. So it's very similar. But I mean, going back to your question, like, you know, will I ever go back to live action? 100%. Yeah. I mean, to me, it's a medium, man. It's like, you know, it's like a paintbrush or a canvas, right? Different canvas, different paintbrush, but you're still an artist. So for me, like, I do miss the idea of waking up at 5 a.m. for 6:30 call time, trying to use your natural surroundings to come up with stuff. That camaraderie on set, and I do miss that, you know, like when your first AD's looking at you and like tapping the watch, say, hey buddy, you only got one more take on this and you want to move it on. You don't get that in Unreal. So yeah.
So what about developing this game? like did you lose your mind having to do the game and the movie at the same time? Is it the same story, or is it like an offshoot, or how's that work?
You know, it's definitely an offshoot. It's kind of pure accident. We never actually planned to make a game. What happened was like Sam Rabello, who's our game designer, now is our game designer, was before he was just building our assets for us. He was building levels in the background of just stuff he was doing on his own personal projects. And I needed a way of just driving a car, because I wanted to kind of figure out how to do the car chase with the physics, and I didn't want to animate physics. So obviously doing it in real time, get real time physics, right? So, and we realized, you know what, plugging an Xbox controller in there, we could make a game. So we thought, you know what, like we got time in the world. One weekend we decided to have a game jam, just to, you know, have a mental break from the movie and just do a game jam. So we got one of the levels, got two of the characters, Max and Leon, and some of the bad guys. Sam constructed a game project in Unreal using all those assets, the same assets, by the way. We didn't do any LODs or anything like that. Exactly the same assets. And we plugged the controller in. We started just running around, like, capture the flag, trying to capture Max, and bad guys trying to shoot Max, and Leon trying to, and we're like, we have a friggin' video game here. It's just incredible fun. This is so much fun. And then we realized, and then I was thinking about, oh my God, there's so much stuff that we wanted to put into the movie, which we couldn't. There's only so much you can put into a 90-minute linear movie, right? And there's so many stuff. I remember speaking to Stavros that went onto like all these notes, all these script notes in our Evernote that's just lying there. Like, one of the things like, what if we were able to use Max as an actual weapon? You can't do that in the movie, but you can do that in the game. And that's when we realized, okay, well, let's start making the game. And we started to schedule it in a way where Sam would work on the game like 2 days a week while he's waiting for certain shots to be blocked out. And then he'll come on and work on the film and then back onto the game. Like, I'll work on the game on my weekend and Andrea would work on the game. And then we managed to put a level together and we thought, let's just, we've got nothing to lose. Let's just put it out on Steam as like an early access demo. And we did that. And we kind of helped us get our foot in the industry in terms of like as a game studio. And now, we're developing video games because we just love doing that. But again, it's another medium of telling stories. As a storyteller, I'm like, multi-branch narrative? Oh my God, there's so much stuff I wish I could do in linear that you can only do in multi-branch, right? So yeah.
So now that you are at this point with this project, what's next?
For sure. I mean, obviously Rift is in development still, but one of the things we learned when releasing Rift on early access was, I mean, this is a good and bad thing, but the good thing was everyone assumed it was like a AAA game. Like, oh my God, this looks really cool. So they're all expecting this to be a AAA game. We're like, no, we're just a tiny studio, man. We're like, this is not a AAA game. So we had to really reassess. We're like, okay. And at the same time, Microsoft offered us a placement on their Microsoft Xbox ID program, which is called the Independent Developers Program, which means that we have Xbox development kits. We get to launch our stuff directly onto Xbox. We get all the support from Xbox. So we're like, officially, oh my God, we're making games for Xbox. So for us, like the whole team sat down, we're like, there's a lot of pressure to get the first game out there that is looking huge and big. So we decided we're going to make a smaller game first called Synchromania, which is based on a character sync in Rift in a way, which again, we had a bunch of ideas what we could do with that character. Why don't we give that character its own spin-off game, right? Which is literally a killer machine. And what we decided to do was like, one of the things we realized, especially Andrea and myself, who were a similar age, we both like grew up playing games on Super Nintendo and playing games on arcades. So, I would go to the arcades and play games like Mercs, right? And on Super Nintendo, I would play Contra 3 or Castlevania or Super Metroid. And I kind of missed those side-scroller action-y games. So we decided, what if we could make a game that reflects the 90s retro simple game mechanics of run and gun and shoot, yet with today's high quality, high fidelity visual flair of next gen consoles. And that's what we're doing with Synchromania. And then we end up getting asked to help out to do a trailer for a metaverse company, which called X Manor, which we did the trailer for. And guess what we used for that? We used Unreal Engine. And they came back and go, hey man, can you do some more of these videos to really show what this metaverse is? I'm like, well, why are you doing a Web 2 approach to show the metaverse? Why don't you just take a Web 3 approach, which is why you just prototype the thing? Like, oh, but how do we do that? I'm like, well, the trailer that we just made for you? They're like, yeah. That was done in a game engine. They're like, what? Yeah. So then we spent a month, we prototyped it using the same assets, and now we're official, and this is all in the press. We're official partners of developing and the creative side of the metaverse project called X Manor. And that involves us doing a lot of gamification projects and video games and stuff. So now, through using Unreal to do an animated project, we end up going towards video games. And now as a company, we have multiple branches of businesses, which allows our artists to not only stay fresh and relevant, but also not bored.
Something we've been starting to do more on the show is like, for people that want to break in the industry, either industry, I guess, in this respect, in terms of filmmaking or game design, or want to start your own company. Actually, I think that would be interesting because we've talked to some people that have started their own company, but take us through that a little bit and like advice you might give to someone who wants to follow in your footsteps.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, here's the thing. You really got to understand that whatever you do in life, whether it's setting up a company, making a movie, doing any kind of project, is you got to maintain that drive throughout, and it's not easy. right? So if you feel like, oh my God, I don't have the drive to do that, that's okay. That's normal. So for me, you need to have that drive, and I find that drive through just like looking at people that are doing work. Like one of my favorite game designer or game director is Hideo Kojima, who did Death Stranding, Metal Gear Solid, and I just love his storytelling. I'm like, I want to be like that guy. So I have someone to kind of look up to. I want to be that guy. But at the same time, you want to ask yourself, what kind of creative do you want to be? And there is no right or wrong answer at all. A lot of it's subjective. For me, I didn't want to be a creative where I was working for someone else. I've done that. I've been through the trenches and it's been amazing. I've learned so much. It's made me who I am. But I want to have creative autonomy on how I do things. Now, of course, that's a very bold statement to have, is to have creative autonomy, because that involves you need to have the right financing in place. So the only way to have creative autonomy on your project and for you to really do it professionally and make a career out of it and a business. And when I say business, the business side is only to allow you to continue making stuff, right? And it's to set up a company. And there's a whole load of different ways to set up a company. For me, it's always been from day one to surround yourself with good people. So, before setting up HaZimation, I had worked with my business partner, Paula Crickard, on my second movie. We had worked on tons of projects together. We have a good shorthand, and she does things that are way better than what I could do, where she could put a schedule and a budget like a ninja. It would take me forever to put that budget and schedule together. She knows all about the tax incentives because she produces movies and TV shows. And she loves technology. So that's someone good to have with you when you set up a company. And then the other one is, you need someone that's able to set up an infrastructure for you, that's got your back. Whenever you got the crazy idea, that they can figure out the technology to make that happen and to problem solve. And that's Andrea Tedeschi, my head of CG. So having those two on my side was when we decided, let's make HaZimation. And that's what we did. So we set up a company. And again, you don't have to go crazy. You don't need to go and freaking hire a big office, hire a bunch of interns or hire a bunch of executives, put loads of money on slates of development. You don't have to do that. No, I had a lot of friends that did that, and they end up burning their money and not having anything to show in return because they just paying the studio rent or paying for people to develop scripts. And you're like, okay, that's great, but
yeah, cart before the horse sort of deal.
Exactly. But back in the day, that was considered as, oh, you're successful, man, you actually have a company. Think about it, dude. 5 years ago, if you tell people, yeah, I have a company, and they're like, where are you based? You're like, oh, we work remotely. They give you this weird look like, oh, you're not really a proper company. Whereas today it's like, oh, that's kind of standard, right? So really, and also make sure you got a bit of money put aside, because the last thing you want to do is start going into projects and start hiring people and not having money to pay them. Because, I used to work at companies when I was an artist. Oh yeah, the money's coming through. Just stay with us for a few more weeks. I can't do that, man. I won't be able to sleep at night. So have some kind of reserve set up to allow you to do that. Have a full plan. Have an exit strategy. The exit strategy is, okay, each one of us are fully aware that if this fails, we can close the company and go off and do projects elsewhere. If you have that at the back of your mind, therefore you know that you can fail and it's okay to fail. And that's the other thing also, is listen to people. But now, not everyone you talk to gives you advice. It means that you should take their advice. But do listen to them. Don't be arrogant about it. Listen to them, because there may be one nugget in there you're like, oh my God, that's a good point. And also, the thing that I love listening to is I always ask people, great, that's great that you're successful and everything, but tell me some of your failures. I want to hear about your failures, because I learn more from looking at what other people did when they failed and how they recovered from that. Or if they didn't recover, that's okay. But those are the sort of things you should look out for when you set up a company, is that, look out for those things and just have in the back of your mind that it's okay to fail, right? Once you've got that in your mind, the pressure's off and you can just focus on doing what you truly want to do.
Yeah, I don't think that's all good advice, particularly, when you were mentioning earlier about I want to work for myself because I worked under people for a long time. I don't want to do that anymore. But I think that that's really important to actually go through and work for other people, because if you don't do that, then you don't know how to actually do it when the time comes for you to be in charge.
Exactly. And I've learned so much amazing things working for other people. I've also learned things like things like bad habits that I shouldn't do, but you don't know that until you experience that working at other companies. So absolutely, I always advise anyone, especially those millennials, whenever they come out and they want to set up a big startup. I'm like, great, but maybe spend some time at a company, even as a placement or something, as work experience. Just surround yourself being at a company before setting up a company, because I think it would help. I think it would help a lot.
Yeah, even if you learn what not to do,
100%.
That's really important too. A bunch of people that we made the feature with worked on this short, and that was it was a feature film in this really rural North Carolina town, and it was just miserable. We shot for I think 22 straight days, working 16 hours a day.
Wow.
Not getting paid. We were still in film school, and it was rough.
Wow.
And we wound up making our movie in, when was it, 2015.
Right.
I was like, we cannot do what they did. You got to treat people right, and you got to figure out what is the best way to do that so that they'll keep coming back and working on your project. Because if you have a crew that has no morale, then you're screwed. Then you're done. Then your movie's not. It's going to show in your movie. So
100%.
Yeah. And what about some failures on your end? You were talking about learning from failures. Do you have any that were really enlightening, that really helped you?
In terms of like working at other companies that I've picked up, or stuff?
Sure.
Yeah.
Or anything that's happened, even maybe working on your own stuff.
Definitely. I mean, it's very similar to what you said about crew. Like when I was a visual effects supervisor, of course, I'm not going to name names here, but when I was a visual effects supervisor, I worked on a feature film, and the director was, I guess the director was very, he had confidence issues or something, because he felt like he needed to shout to make his point across that he was in charge. And I'm like, wow. And at the time, I'm like, oh, that's what all directors do, I guess. But then you have lunch in the canteen, or in the canteen tent, right? And the crew are like, we're not giving this guy an inch more of our time. We do our hours and we're off. And the minute you start losing respect of your crew, you're done for. It's going to be, you need to recover very, very fast, because if you're doing like a 12-day shoot, 22-day shoot, 25-day shoot, however long the shoot, even a 3-day shoot, right? You need to be on their side. And one of the things that I worked with another director who was way more experienced than this director, by the way, like way like high profile. And his approach was very calm. And he even got to the point where like, guys, I don't know how to do this. Help me. And the reaction you get from the crew, like, we're going to help this guy. He didn't, because he's the director. He doesn't have to prove he's the director. And yet he was willing to say, look, man, I have no idea how to pull this off, but I need your help. I know what I want, but I need your help. Those are simple human words to say. And it makes such a big difference. Huge difference. So that's one thing that I learned. I took that with me. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be that guy where I'm going to try to make my point, or I'm not going to listen. I'm going to say, I'm the director. You don't come up with ideas. If anyone has an idea, say the idea. Whether it goes in, it's a different thing, but you should never shut someone down for trying to speak their thoughts or say something, right? So that's the thing that I learned. In terms of mistakes I've made as a company, I guess for me is like, you make all kinds of mistakes, whether it's business decisions, creative decisions. I've gone into projects before where I'm like, oh my god, this is the way to do it. In fact, it was on Rift actually. Like we thought we were going to do a sequence in a certain way, and I was so adamant it's going to be that way. And then you look at it, you're like, oh my god, this is not going to work. If only I had really taken the time to really maybe like test this out, or at least show it to someone. So this is one of the things that we do now is, because of that, we do screen testing a lot. It's very nerve-wracking. I'm sure you can appreciate it. Like, as a director doing screen testing, it's nerve-wracking because it's your baby, right? And people are going to rip it to pieces. But at the same time, you've got nothing to lose. It's a contained audience in a room or online. They're going to give their notes, and some of the notes are brutal. They're going to be brutal, but that's okay, because it's better to get those brutal notes now as opposed to releasing it officially and people are ripping your movie apart in reviews, right? So that's kind of a lesson learned there, and also a lesson to like. And also the other lesson I learned also was when the Beyond first came out, I remember reading all the YouTube comments and IMDb comments. And that's a big no-no.
Yeah, don't look at what people are saying about your movie online.
Don't do that.
It's not fun. Yeah.
They're called trolls, right? You're going to get trolls all the time. And that's what they do. And I remember reading one comment. At one point, I'm like, oh my God, I'm a hack. I'm never going to make it in life. And then I remember reading one comment where this guy said, oh my God, the Beyond it's so bad. It's just as bad as Arrival. I'm like, wait, did he just...
Wait, Arrival is great.
It's like one of my favorite friggin' movies, like amazing director. I'm like, and that's when you realize you're going to get haters out there. You're making art. It's subjective. That's the thing about art. You know, people are going to either love it or they're going to hate it. That is art. Once you get your head around that, you're bulletproof, man. Because you're going to make the best movie that you want to make. You do it at your best ability. And then it's in the hands of the audience, whether it's the right timing of the movie, whether your execution could have been better. It is what it is. You're an artist. That's all you can do, you know?
Yeah. And I find too, like, when you do connect with someone who genuinely enjoys the work, I think that speaks more speaks louder than any sort of troll or negative review you can get. Because like we had when we did our festival run for our movie, and we went to a lot of festivals that were like, not super well known, but we also went to one where we did get distribution and nice. At the Lone Star Festival in Texas and Fort Worth, and we had someone come up to us after that. We had a big, we were screening an AMC theater, and it was like nice. A big deal for us because we hadn't had that yet. We'd been in some theaters, but they were really small, and then we were like, oh holy shit, we're like on an AMC screen, and there's like 75 people here watching the movie. Like for us, that was a really big deal. This little self-financed indie project, and we had someone come up afterwards who said, who was a domestic abuse survivor, and our story was about a domestic abuse survivor. And she's like, I connected so much to that character. That character was me. I appreciate the way you made this movie. It was it was raw and unflinching, and really spoke to the experience someone goes through with that. And I was like, man, that's really great. We got rejected from all these big festivals, Atlanta, Toronto, Sundance, whatever. But I was like, you know what? For someone to connect with that character who we put a lot of time into in that performance, that just meant the world. That there was we got also good responses other than that, but it was like that's the one that's always stuck with me. That has awesome. Beaten any negative stuff that we've gotten or any rejections we've gotten. So
it's a personal connection, man. You made a movie that connected to someone personally
who we didn't know.
I mean,
we didn't know, right?
Yeah,
that's the biggest one.
But that's an achievement. That's a huge achievement. That's even more of an achievement than just having great box office numbers, because you've made a movie that moved someone. And that's the thing about great movies, great music, great book literature, is if you're able to move just that one person, you've done your
it's
job,
worth it. It makes it all worth it. All the hours and all the blood, sweat, and tears and all that stuff. Yeah. Well, HaZ, this is really fun, man. I cannot wait to see what happens with Rift. I got to check out your stuff that I haven't seen yet. And thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us today. This was a ton of fun. Do you want to plug anything? Anything else you want to plug? We always want to give our guests time to do that.
I would just say it's all Rift, man. Like definitely, go to AWN Animation World Network site. You'll see on one of the news page, HaZimation.com. You can go to my website. You'll see the trailer. And just keep an eye out, man. There's going to be a lot of Rift stuff coming out because as we build up to the launch. So, yeah. And thanks so much, Graham. It's been a blast chatting to you, man.
Oh, great. I'm glad you had a good time. And, best of luck out there at the festival. Look forward to hearing what happens.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for us this week. We want to thank HaZ again for being our guest. To find out more about Mudstack, head over to mudstack.com, where you can find links to follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and join our community on Discord. And of course, we want to thank you, as always, for listening. We'll see you next time on Clear as Mud.